This is my spoiler-heavy rant over Alien Covenant. I'm not here to endlessly criticize the movie. This video has to be a finite length anyways, but I want to tackle the biggest issues that I had with it. If you thought the ending of Prometheus was going to give you some sort of a satisfying feeling, or those little prologues afterwards, guess what? You're not going to get that in this movie. Similar to what we saw in Alien 3, where the ending of Alien 2 wasn't really realized, and you had essentially a stake in your heart when Newt was essentially killed in the opening credits and Ripley was killed by the end of Alien 3. This is similar to what we experienced with Prometheus, where the trailers leading up to that film didn't really provide an accurate representation of what the film was going to be. Perhaps studios like this shouldn't do that anymore. A theme that's starting to emerge in this franchise is the importance of philosophical questions as a matter of fleshing out the series. This is because the series has so many things, going against it. It can't have a continual set of characters that make it to the end of each theatrical release and into the next one. And if any do survive into from the end of this film into the next one, they're usually dead really quickly in the next one, or they die some point within. The lone example being Ellen Ripley in the first three movies, and then a clone of her that was brought back for the fourth. There isn't a lot of character continuity in this series, and that really hurts it. So right now, the only character that we have in this existing series that'll make it into the next film is David, and honestly, who knows if he'll outlast that one. I'm presuming, of course, he isn't killed before the next feature film, to such an extent he's alive in the first place. But I'm not really betting that Tennessee or Daniels make it into the next film, except perhaps in a cameo or as a corpse or something. So let's start with the criticisms of this film before I expand outwards to the franchise, because I like this movie, and honestly, I've enjoyed the entire Alien series despite its many flaws. But I'm going to end up being a little bit more critical of this release in the areas, that I felt it had issues, because I think this series, since it's going to go on, could benefit from a little constructive criticism. So let's start with the lead-in to Covenant. From its prequel Prometheus, we see this white living room of sorts. It's a lot different than what I expected in Alien film, to start off with. And of course, we have a philosophical discussion between a newborn android and its creator. I wasn't really a fan of how this completely shifted, the story from the end of Prometheus to the beginning of this film, but it's good that we got to see a lot of the details fleshed out or filled in as this movie progressed. In retrospect, I think the prequel to this movie was actually one that gets better with age, though a lot of details don't become evident unless you watch a lot of explainer videos on the internet, after watching it. But at the end of this movie, Alien Covenant, by the end of it, you really do have a lot of questions answered. I wasn't a fan of how Shaw's character was killed off in between the end of Prometheus and the beginning of Covenant. I can only surmise that David tried experimenting on her while she was in cryosleep, or maybe he was trying to keep her alive and inadvertently killed her. Maybe he was trying to use some of her genetic material and got carried away, or somehow he underestimated the impact of the experimentation. I don't really know. Also, I would have liked an explanation of the engineers. I guess this is the engineers' homeworld, or maybe one of the worlds that they inhabited or in which they created life on. I also didn't really understand how in piloting the ship, there was a second ship that it hooks up with before activating its weapon, killing all the people down below. It was pretty confusing. As far as the androids, I saw much more David as well as Walter than I ever expected in a sequel to Prometheus. I also don't think there needed to be a William in this case. There could have been another android. Sure, that twist at the end wouldn't have been there, but actually that's another reason to have a different actor play another android in this film altogether. I would have liked to have seen Danny McBride have more on-screen time as well, as he was, in my opinion, the most interesting character outside of David. This production could have been named David, and it would have been more appropriate than Covenant, the name of the ship. There's no real wordplay with Covenant here that I can determine, at least. Now let's talk about the alien race known only as the Engineers, as if an entire race can only be one thing. I'm not sure why David killed all the engineers on that planet if he wanted to experiment on life forms to create xenomorphs. Why is a 3 billion-year-old race easy to kill anyways? There's no sign of evolution today in terms of what we saw 3 billion years ago in the opening scene of Prometheus and what we're seeing today. I don't know what to make of this whole creators versus destroyers paradigm that I keep hearing online, as I can't really imagine a society so advanced being so binary and so limited in design. And speaking of evolution, the xenomorph life cycle is different here, and these aliens grow extremely quickly now. I guess this maybe answers the chicken and egg question. The alien comes before the egg and then the face hugger. One of the many flaws of the previous films, but it's highly evident here, is these aliens magically grow super quick and gain tons of mass very fast, and suddenly they're huge without apparently consuming any food to become that large. Also, on this planet that they're visiting, there's no animal life remaining, yet there's the rest of the ecosystem, which should perish without that complementary animal system. Perhaps there's two types of black powder or gooey substance, but clearly there are inconsistencies, to me at least, on how they destroy or create. And it's just not clear in either motion pictures. Also, maybe this is a technology, gone to the wayside, but I think practical effects could still be used here and there in these films. I think there's too much CGI and a reliance on it that is unneeded. I think for some closer, maybe more intimate scenes, there should be some practical effects maybe thrown in, with CGI assisting, I don't know. But often the technology in this spectacle is so far advanced from the original Alien movie. And I'd like to see an explanation and perhaps some sort of confluence in terms of the setting and spaceship design between now and then. Was the Nostromo an older type of vehicle still in service, for a reason not previously explained? There could be an intelligent retconning, I think, that could cover this issue. I also thought Covenant was fairly predictable right up to the final scene, especially the final scene. But I think that was because Ridley Scott or the writers or the studio need some assistance here. They need to just watch the comedy hit Scream and go through its rules of horror and try to have these characters, obey those rules. Obviously, these characters can't learn, from all the mistakes within this franchise or similar films or avoid all those rules. But I'd like to see a smarter class of victim, please. I'd like to see a future entry in the Alien franchise where the protagonists do all the right things or mostly the right things. Maybe a mistake or two might occur, but otherwise we see the best of humanity against these highly advanced killing creatures. In the future, I'd like to see people that do smart things instead of dumb ones and still get owned by the aliens, or in some cases prevail against them instead of what we saw here in a long line of films in this series, where the dumbest thing imaginable is followed up by the next dumber thing imaginable, to essentially give the far superior aliens more of a leg up than needed. If these xenomorphs are the perfect killing organisms, shouldn't that be more evident in these films? And talking about dumb stuff, I don't really understand the need for the android kiss between the brothers and the fingering remark. They felt hugely unnecessary and they took away from the moment. There are several people in my theater that laughed at those two things because they thought it was just weird, You're not going to see brothers kiss, for example. So the dialogue sabotaged itself in multiple scenes. Also felt that making love in the shower scene was not needed. I believe Hollywood thinks that we're dumb and we have to have the gratuitous nude or sex scene where it's just not needed. I guess, maybe they're trying to up the ante, but I just don't think it adds anything to this film. And I'm not done with the dumb stuff. There was that fight scene where David and Walter were fighting, and it's pretty obvious that David was going to return to the ship, not Walter. This gimmick would only fool someone who's really young and has never seen any other movie where two identical characters, usually played by the same actors, pivot like this one did towards the end. Lastly, I'm not a fan of that brief man of faith discussion that occurred in essentially one scene, though I found it interesting the approach they took in calling essentially someone that believes in religion as automatically less reliable. I feel like if you're going to make a theism versus atheism story arc or some sort of a mention or a point, as a matter of character, that could have been explored. and not just used to make the guy seem mildly autistic and lacking empathy of others, which is often the claim made by atheists towards the religious, when the reality is not necessarily that. A lot of people that are religious are deeply empathetic towards others, which is why they, go to church and give to charity and do all that stuff. And I feel like this is a dynamic that could have been explored in this film, but it's just, hey, here's a brief hand wave over here to this topic, and it never has any relevance throughout the film. I realize they're trying to use some sort of religious theme in this, going beyond the philosophical into the religious. The title of the movie is Alien Covenant. The ship is somewhat like the Ark with a whole bunch of pairs of colonists and embryos, making a voyage from one place to the other. It's not really clear what the Covenant is supposed to mean in this film. I don't know. I just felt like there were some missed opportunities here to maybe have greater meaning within this horror film, and I just felt they kind of fell short of the mark. But anyways, that's it for now. I'm tying with the idea of making one more video on this regarding the Alien canon itself and the confusion that's become apparent, within the spin-off prequel series that we're dealing with right now and the rest of the franchise, and how apparently the Predators and the AVP series, they're not apparently canon anymore, but I think what we're seeing here doesn't necessarily mean that is the case. I think they could still theoretically fit within this universe. Anyways, thank you very much for watching, and have a great day.